Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I finally have my top 20 contemporary romances that I read in 2021. So I do have a video that is all about my top 10 romances in all subgenres. So I have historical, fantasy, paranormal, and contemporary in there. So those are the best of the best, what I consider. But these are the top 20 books that just like stuck with me that are my favorites that I also wanted to share with you. So here we go. Let's go ahead and get right into it. I'm actually going to be listing these in the order that I read them throughout the year, so the ones that I read at the first of the year will be first, towards the end of the year will be last. Now, the first book that is on my list is actually also the first book that I read for that year, and it is Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. I know that this is a fan favorite of Penelope Douglas, but I have sort of had a hit or miss relationship with her. I haven't really loved any of her books until I read Birthday Girl, and so because I had started with some of her other books, I was a little put off by this. I finally read it because everyone kept telling me you're gonna like it, and you were completely right. This book was beautiful. I really felt like it was honestly one of the most perfect age gap, forbidden, taboo-ish romances that I've ever read. I just adored this couple. This is basically, if you haven't heard about this, I think pretty much everybody has. The heroine and her fiancé are having some financial difficulties, so they move in with her fiancé's dad, who she actually happened to meet in the movie theater, not realizing that that was her fiancé's dad. They move in with him, nothing happens, something with the dad and the heroine until the fiancé and the heroine break up, and she ends up staying there, and then they have a romance. It's fantastic. It was literally everything that I ever wanted in an age gap romance. I think it's just, it's talked about so often, I feel like for good reason. This was a book that absolutely lived up to the hype for me. I adored it. Okay, another book that I have on my list is The Rebel King by Kennedy Ryan. This is actually the second book in the Kingmaker duet. And this book is my favorite out of the two of those, and I think that is largely because of the hero in here, Maxim. He is so protective and possessive over Lennox, and just the way that he constantly was putting her first and just being such a great example of what I think the best type of alpha hero is. I loved him so much in this. He was just absolutely, like, when the Kingmaker ends, it ends on a cliffhanger, and the heroine is in danger. And so when this book opens, they're separated and she's been kidnapped, and Maxim is literally going to burn the world down to find her. And that is without a doubt my favorite type of hero. I loved him. I thought he was fantastic. I felt like this was an epic conclusion to this duology, and I just freaking adored it so much. Okay, another book that was a favorite read of mine is Love at First by Kate Clayborn. I really, really loved this one. I felt like it was sweet, it was romantic, it had a lot of great depth, it had a really great found family in here. I just loved this book so much. It was like a comfort read. It was engaging and romantic and a little angsty, but it was overall just so comforting. I just loved it. So this basically starts with our hero and heroine. They meet when they're very, very young, when the hero's mother takes him to her dad's apartments where she needs some money, basically. She's very ill, she needs some money. She goes there to ask her dad, and he turns her down. So the hero, as a young teenage boy, he's like 13 or 14, looks up and sees this young girl up there, and she's like throwing things out the window. And he's just very struck with her in that moment. They don't actually technically meet, but he remembers her. Years pass, they grow up. He returns to those apartments because his grandfather has died and left it to the hero. So he plans to go in there and basically renovate it and sell them and make some money. He's a doctor at a hospital. And when he goes in there, he ends up meeting the heroine, who still lives there. She lives there alone, and she has really cultivated the people, mostly elderly people, who live in these apartments, and that has just become her tight-knit family. And she doesn't want anything to happen to them or their homes. She doesn't want anything to be displaced, and so they sort of butt heads in that way. But they're both so drawn to one another, and I felt like their romance was such a sweet and beautifully developing one that I honestly just loved it. I felt like it was pretty much perfect, and it was one of my favorite contemporaries for a reason. I thought it was just beautiful. All right, and something that I did a lot last year was I just sort of went to authors that I loved and read a bunch of their books. So some authors are on here more than once, and I make no apologies for that because I was just so obsessed with this author's writing that I wanted to read everything I could get my hands on, and they quickly came up to the top of my list of favorite authors, and one of those became my new all-time favorite author, who I've already mentioned, and that's Kennedy Ryan, and this book is Hookshot. This is the last book in her Hoop series. This hero in here, oh my gosh, I loved him so much. He was a little bit broken. He's recently divorced. His wife had an affair. He's an NBA player, very famous, has a daughter, and he is definitely a little bit broken when this book starts. He ends up being very captivated by a heroine who has shown up in previous books, like they both have flashes of meeting each other in previous books in the Hoop series. But he's never really made a move on her until something just compels him to do so because he can't stop thinking about her, wants to take a chance with her, and they had such great chemistry in here. They had a really soul-level connection, which I think Kennedy does so well, and the way that this hero was so protective of the heroine too, and this is another very classic alpha protective possessive hero that Kennedy has done, but not in a toxic way, but just in the way that nobody is going to treat my woman like this, nobody is going to talk to my woman like he just is. It's just so delicious. Like, there's a scene in here where the heroine had done some nude modeling for a photographer, and without her permission, that photographer sort of released the photos into this art exhibit, and she's just kind of devastated, and he goes up there, man, and he is not going to let anybody treat his woman like that, and it was a thing of beauty. I adored this book. It's emotionally heavy-hitting, and it's just fantastic, and I just literally ate this whole thing up, loved it so much. He's one of my favorite heroes that Kennedy has ever written. Alright, and another book that I read that is a new-to-me author is his Muse by Twyla Turner. So I actually talked about this and in a reading vlog as I was reading it, and I had a lot of mixed feelings sort of with how the ending happened. This definitely has an HEA, don't be afraid of that for sure, but I was at times a little disappointed with how the HEA played out, but I have not been able to stop thinking about this book. It is deeply romantic. This hero is absolutely obsessed with this woman in the best possible way, with her physical form, with her personality, with her drive, with everything about her. He is just completely smitten with her, and it is one of the most beautiful expressions of love in a relationship that I have ever read about. And for that reason, I ended up, like, initially I gave it 3 stars, and then throughout the year I moved it up to a 4-star. And then when I was finally at that final moment when I was preparing my best of the year list, I moved it to a 5-star because I'm like, I could not stop thinking about this book. It was beautiful and powerful and just a little heart-aching, but absolutely stunning. I just loved this book so much. So let me tell you basically what this is about. This is about our heroine. She is a black woman and she's recently divorced, and her husband cheated on her. Her daughter is all grown up, so she decides she's going to take life into her own hands, and she goes to Paris, where she's going to start a business for other black independent women who are looking to travel and experience the world. So as she does that, she ends up at a gallery exhibit one night, and she meets the artist Etienne, our hero. There is an age gap. She's older than him. He's quite a bit younger than her, and they have this just spark-filled chemistry, this just magnetic attraction to one another that night. They're just drawn to each other, especially Etienne. Like, he cannot take his eyes off of her. He is a figure artist, and he specializes in black women, nude black women, and he just is awestruck with her beauty and her presence, and it is just delicious. So it's their romance. Because of the age gap, certain things come into play which might make you believe that there's not a happily ever after, but I can guarantee you that there is. This is a beautiful book. I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to read more from this author. This is still the only book I've read by hers, but I was blown away by their romance, and she's definitely an author that I want to watch and read more from. Okay, and I don't know that this list would be complete without a Talia Hibbert, and like most people, my favorite book by Talia Hibbert last year was Act Your Age, Eve Brown. This book was fantastic. I feel like each book in the Brown Sisters trilogy kind of gets better than the one before, although I do have a very soft spot for Dani Brown. But this heroine in here, she's a little bit of a hot mess. She's definitely not doing what her parents think that she should be doing, and she's kind of a chaotic, how does it describe her? Oh, it says she's a certified hot mess. So yeah, she ends up going to this bed and breakfast, and asking to work there as a chef, the hero is not too impressed with her, doesn't think that she's going to be a good fit, but when he doesn't have any other options, he accepts, gives her the job, and they have the sweetest but also the sexiest romance that I have ever read from Talia Hibbert. I felt like their passion was just like way up here, but their connection was so endearing too, and this book was funny, it was very steamy, it was just fantastic, a ton of fun. Absolutely adored it. Okay, and the next book that I have is Twisted Love by Anna Huang. This is the first book in her Twisted series, and while I did really, really love Twisted Love and Twisted... I can't remember what the second one is called. I can't remember. The second one is the Bodyguard and the Princess one, which I also really, really loved, but I just kept coming back and thinking about this one, and I think it's largely because, again, Alex is very protective, very possessive of the heroine, but also a little bit broody and a little bit melancholy. Like, he is definitely what I would consider to be more a morality chain type of hero in that he is only good for the heroine. He's also has this dark, shady background that you don't really find out about until the end, which I thought was a really fun and interesting plot twist into here. But overall, I really, really loved their chemistry. I loved their connection, and I just felt like this book was such a surprise to me. It was the first I'd read from this author, and it completely swept me away, and I just adored it. It's basically about our heroine who has recently been broken up with her boyfriend, and he's kind of stalking her, giving her some trouble. She lives next door to her brother, and her brother's kind of been keeping an eye on her, but he's going to actually travel, and so he asks his best friend to keep an eye on his sister, and so it's a brother's best friend romance too, and yeah, things heat up between them. It was fabulous. I really love this book. I think it's fantastic. I know a lot of people, I think, tend to prefer the second book, and initially I really got caught up in book 2, the one with the bodyguard and the princess. It was very hot. It was very wonderful. But at the end of the year, when I kept thinking about the books that I loved, this one definitely stuck with me more. I just really resonated with these characters and the story that was being told here. I loved it. And this next book is another Kennedy Ryan book. Sorry, not sorry. I read her entire backlist, everything she had written last year, and there were so many of her books that were just absolute favorites of mine. I feel like the woman never misses. Everything that she writes is just phenomenal. But Be Mine Forever... right? Be Mine Forever is part of her Bennett series, which is actually their first published series. This is book 3 in that series, and it is about our hero and heroine who we have seen a little bit come into play in books 1 and 2, but this is their love story. They were childhood friends. She had a crush on him all throughout her teenage years and adult years, and she is finally at the point where she's like, I guess this man is never gonna love me, so I'm going to move on. And right when she decides to do that is when he decides, you know what? I think I'm actually going to try and take a chance and make things work with her. He's an artist. He is a very tortured, broody type of hero, but also another very possessive and protective hero, which we love. Our heroine is a businesswoman. She is very capable, very confident, and just curvy and beautiful. And they have this very beautiful sort of a push and pull type of romance that at times they give into and other times they try to pull back. And there's a lot of angst in this book. There's a beautiful, sexy scene where he literally paints her while she's laying on a canvas. It's so wonderful. I love this book so much. You have to read the series. Books 1 and 2 are more of a duet. They're good, but books 3 and 4 are fantastic. I loved them so much. So book 4 was also one of my favorites of the year, but I had so many Kennedy books on here that I tried to narrow it down a little bit. All right, and the next book on here is... it almost made my top 10. It almost did. Like, I love this book so much. And it is Ruthless Stranger by Maggie Cole. This is a mafia romance. This has a little bit of an age gap where the hero is a little bit older than the heroine, and this book was fantastic. I honestly loved this so much. So this starts with our heroine, who's recently divorced, had a lot of heartbreak in her divorce, and she's in Vegas with a bunch of girlfriends. They really are trying to encourage her to go and have a one-night stand and to just sort of have this night of passion and fun because they feel like she deserves it, and she's not really ready or willing to do that. But the hero overhears her friends sort of talking about this. He sees her and he's like, hey, I would be willing to do that if maybe if she doesn't have any other connection, I'll blindfold her so she doesn't see me, so it really literally can be a one-night stand. And they have an extremely passionate connection that quickly evolves into more when they end up having a chance meeting later on. This is another very protective, very possessive hero, which is definitely my thing. But they also have to have a soft side with the heroine. Like, they can't be a complete alpha hole. Those guys will never make my top heroes list. But Maxim, oh my gosh, he was fantastic. I loved him and Aspen together. I felt like they had so much chemistry, such a beautiful emotional connection. Like, I just loved and adored this book so much. It was fantastic. Alright, the next book on here is actually the first book from this author that I read, and it has stayed with me as one of my favorites. It is my favorite in this series, and it is Stolen Heir by Sophie Lark. This is the second book in her Brutal Birthright series, and it is a Beauty and the Beast mafia romance. Oh my gosh, it is so completely stunning and beautiful. We have a very hard, tattooed mafia boss hero who ends up kidnapping this Russian sort of a princess. She's a ballerina. She is just so fragile, has this really ethereal beauty, but she has an inner strength too. And he kidnaps her, and then they end up falling in love, and it's just so beautiful. Like, this book had so many moments in here that I felt like were just achingly beautifully romantic, but it also has that really fast-paced, sort of mysteriously intriguing mafia plot, and he has a very complicated backstory. It was fantastic. I really loved this book. I feel like if you like romances that are a little bit not typical to your regular mafia romances, I would definitely recommend this. Also, if you're looking for a book to start with Sophie Lark, I would recommend this one for sure. This is the one I started with her, and I loved it. It was fantastic, and this is what started my obsession with her. Alright, the next book on my list is The Pool Boy by Nikki Sloan. This is a very hot age gap romance with an older heroine and a younger hero. She is recently divorced, and she's been working on herself. She has this body that she is extremely proud of, and she ends up sunning herself by her pool. While the pool boy is there, she goes to change in like the little shower house. He ends up walking in on her and seeing her naked, and that is what really starts their relationship into this combustible chemistry. But honestly, like, when I read this book, I was really prepared for it to be very high heat, and that was all. And I was really surprised at the levels of emotional depth that this book had too. Like, it was very sweet, it was very complex, they had a great relationship, and if you've watched any of my videos, especially my most recent ones, you know that this is something that I don't typically love, books that are only heat-driven. So if I'm recommending this book to you, you have to know that it has absolutely both parts of those components. Like, this is definitely one of the hottest books that I have ever read that also has an extremely satisfying romance in here. Like, I love this book so freaking much. It was fantastic. Alright, the next book that I have to recommend is With You Forever by Chloe Leese. This was her new release last fall. This is book 4 in her Bergman Brothers series, and I adored this book. I felt like it was perfection. This has some really great chronic illness representation with Rooney, our heroine, who has ulcerative colitis. She's been having a lot of health issues with that recently, and her doctor basically said, okay, you need to take a break from law school and you need to go and rest and see if you can get your body to recover and start functioning normally. So she does that, and she contacts her friend, one of the Bergmans, and asks if she can go and stay in their cabin. So she does that. However, the Bergman brother, whose turn it is to use the cabin, is up there, and he's been doing these upgrades on it, trying to get it livable, when he realizes that in order to get it livable, he needs to have a significant amount of money, or else they're just going to have to tear it down. So him and Rooney meet, and they have this adorable meet-cute. They've met before in other books, which is very adorable too. But they end up making this arrangement where they're going to get married so that she can access some money from her relatives who left it to her if she gets married. So it sort of has a modern day marriage of convenience trope in here. And then she's going to lend it to him so that he can fix this cabin and bring it back up to par. And it's just, honestly, this book was adorable. I really loved it. I felt like it had a great emotional connection. It was a little bit slow build, but I didn't mind that at all. This was just a deeply satisfying, beautiful book for me, and I loved it. Thought it was fantastic. Alright, another book on here that I really loved this year was Dark Notes by Pam Godwin. This is not a new book by any means, but I did go on a little bit of a deep dive of Pam Godwin last year too. And this book hit me so hard, and I loved and adored it so much. This is another age gap romance, and it is also a student-teacher romance. And the heroine in here is actually 17, and that is usually something that never works for me, but it really did work for me here because I felt like she had a lot of emotional resilience. She's been through a ton of trauma and is still living through that trauma throughout most of this book, and she's very mature as a result of that, and she's really a survivor. Like, she's trying to survive and thrive, and the things she's willing to put herself through in order to do that is just really very compelling and helps you really get endeared to her character. The teacher is the hero. He took a little bit to grow on me, but once he did, I was just completely in awe of him and the way that they connected so beautifully through the trauma and how he really helped her work through that, through some of the darker aspects of their relationship. It was just a thing of beauty. I was completely bowled over by this book. I thought it was fantastic. All right, and then I have another Pam Godwin for you, and it is Vanquish. So this is her Deliver series, which is a series of 9 books. This bind-up has the first 3. You do have to read these books in order, but they are fairly short, so it's not that difficult. I still have the last 4 books in this series to finish. I've only read the first 5. But Vanquish is so far my favorite. It's the second book in this series, and it has as our hero the man who was the villain of the first book. So, y'all know I really love a redemption arc for a hero especially, and boy, this one is one of the most satisfying villain redemption arcs that I have ever read. It was fantastic. We really get a good look at him, his darker side in the first book, Deliver, and we really don't like him at all. What he does to the hero in the first book and the heroine. And because of what happened in the first book, he's trying to hunt them down and bring them back. This is all about basically their sex traffickers and the people that they kidnap and try to put into service and the people who are actually working as the people who do the trafficking. Like, this is a very, very dark book. But the thing that I really loved about Vanquish is how Van sees this woman who is really struggling with agoraphobia. She definitely has a past of disordered eating, and she's a beautiful woman, but she is struggling mentally very, very much. So when he sees her, when he's trying to find the couple from the first book, he doesn't really know what to think about her. And the thing that I loved about their relationship is how he pushed her and challenged her and put her in these situations that sort of forced her to work through some of the things that she wasn't able to do on her own. Their relationship was really sort of symbiotic in that way, in that they needed each other to grow and develop and to be whole. And that is a dynamic that I am a huge fan of, and I feel like it is very difficult to pull off in a way that is satisfying and convincing to the reader, and that also doesn't feel abusive at the end, you know? Although, like, these are extremely dark books. These people do things that you're not gonna like, and that you would, if you were to write this off in, you know, like, if someone who didn't know about dark romance were to read this, they would say this is, you're romanticizing abuse. But that's not what's here. Like, you have to really enjoy the nuanced experiences that these characters have, and how things that maybe you're questioning, is this right? Is this abusive? And how it leads to growth and development. It's very complicated. I feel like it really makes you question and challenge the beliefs that you hold about what are right and wrong, and how that can vary from person to person. It was just fascinating, and their relationship, I was rooting for them from the get-go, and the transformation of Van from the first book to Vanquish was so satisfying and compelling. Like, I adored it so freaking much. Alright, the next book that I have is My Sweet Murder Babies from the Necessary Evils series by Onley James. This is Unhinged, the first book in this series of psychopath serial killer romances, and these are all MM. They are beautiful, they are completely gripping and compelling, and I just honestly started this book because I'd heard people talking about it. I'd heard Jessin was talking about it, and I was like, I want to see what that's about. And I was completely gripped and could not stop reading it. Like, I quickly became obsessed with this book and the next one, and just couldn't stop reading them. They're endearingly sweet, even though they're serial killers and murderers. They have sort of a Dexter vibe where they only go after people who are villains, like true villains that are sort of falling through the cracks of the justice system, and it was fantastic. These two, this one is actually about the hero whose first victim is his love interest's dad. And so that love interest comes to sort of make him pay for killing his dad, and then they get to unfold all the history that actually happened, and he finds out what his dad actually did, and it's just fantastic. Very steamy, very endearing, and just a ton of fun. Alright, the next book on my list is extremely popular. I think most people have read it at this point, and it is The Love Hypothesis. I loved this book. I thought it was so fantastic. I really thought it had great rom-com vibes. I really liked the dynamic of the hero and the heroine. The hero, who was extremely grumpy, broody, and just like, but has like hidden soft center for the heroine that he's sort of kept secret for a really long time. It was so satisfying to me watching their love story. I loved this book. This is Women in STEM. This is basically, he's a professor, she's a student at the university, they have a fake relationship, and I just loved it. I thought it was a ton of fun. I thought they had great chemistry. It was just a really good time. I adored it. Alright, the next book that I have is Riven Night, which is actually the second book in the Clifton Forge series by Devney Perry. This is a motorcycle romance series, and this book I really feel like you do need to read Steel King, which is the first book, because it really sets up the plot for what's going to happen with these characters here. So in the first book, there's a murder mystery, a woman is murdered, and the second book is her daughter, who has been taken into the motorcycle club family because of what happened in the murder, and she is under the protection of one of the members of the motorcycle club who is an extremely damaged hero, and he's got a backstory of his own that has resulted in him really suffering loss and going through some trauma, but he sort of steps up to the plate and protects this woman, and it's their romance. It was absolutely beautiful. I loved it. It was full of angst. It was full of emotion, and it was just fantastic. I really loved their connection. I felt like their romance was completely beautiful, and once again, I do love me a protective hero, so that is exactly what he was. It was fantastic. Alright, the next book that I have is The Rebel by Sophie Lark. This is actually the second book in her Kingmaker series. This is basically about a mafia school for children from like mafia parents or big mafia groups throughout the world come to this school, sort of very reminiscent of Hogwarts. And they have different like houses, like you have people who are going into heirs and accountants and things like that. Like it's very similar. The structure that way is similar to Hogwarts, and it was very fun in that way. I really loved that. The reason that I put number 2, The Rebel, on my list is because of what Sophie did with the plot in here. I was a little astounded at the plot twist that happened in this book. I felt like the first book was incredibly impressive. I really loved the romance in the first book. It had a little bit of a love triangle set up for characters in future books to come. And it also had some really great plot twists in there as well. But the plot twist that happened in book 2, how it sets up for the bully, book 3, kind of blew me away. I wasn't expecting it. It was fantastic. I don't really want to give a whole lot of details because it will really ruin this series if you know too much about what it is. But each book in this series has a romance, and it has a bigger overall plot, which has a pretty big mystery surrounding it that is threaded throughout all 4 books of the Kingmaker series. So this book has our heroine who is in an arranged marriage. She's not married yet, but she's promised to this boy from a rival mafia family, but this marriage is going to bring them together, their families sort of together, and help them to prosper financially and things like that. However, the man that she is supposed to marry is literally a sociopath. Like, he is a dangerous man who finds delight and joy in torturing and terrorizing Zoe, our heroine, and he has no qualms about doing that. So the whole book she's trying to find a loophole, how to get out of this arranged marriage, and in doing so she ends up falling in love with Leo, and their romance was very sweet, it was very hot, and it was just beautiful. And let me tell you, the twist in here, I really thought it was fantastic. I didn't see it coming, and it was a ton of fun. I loved this book so much. Alright, and not to beat a dead horse, I'm sorry, but not really, because I really was just blown away by this book as well. I've got another Sophie Lark book for you, and it is Ivan. This book was one of my favorite books that she has ever written. This is also really a good entry point if you're looking to try this author's work to kind of get a feel for what her books have to offer. This book has an assassin heroine who is sent to kill this mafia boss. And right when she's in the moment, she's got like her syringe full of poison. She's ready. He doesn't know she's there. She hesitates because he's so beautiful and so compelling. She doesn't want to kill him. And that's the moment when he wakes up, he sees her, and they have this physical sparring match between them that is such a fun scene because like they're fighting each other for each other's lives, you know? But there's so much chemistry and so much sexual tension between them because they're so attracted to each other. It was delicious. I really, really loved this book. I loved their connection. One of my favorite mafia romances ever. All right, and the last book that I have for you is 7 Days in June. This is a book that I read towards the end of December. I did talk about it in Vlogmas, and I loved this book. I felt like it was very, very beautifully well done. I really, really loved the idea of these two people who met when they were in high school, when they were both really struggling with some mental and emotional and family health issues. And they meet 17 days in June, and they have this very whirlwind, romantic love story that happens there. They get torn apart as the years pass. They move on and have relationships as adults. She has a child. She's a single mom. And they're both writers, and they have been actually writing in their books each other as characters into their books, and they know that each other is doing that. So they finally meet up at this writers' conference. They were both very successful Black writers. He writes Black literary fiction, she writes paranormal romance, and sparks tend to fly again. They were torn apart in such a way where she sort of believed that he betrayed her, or he didn't have the feelings that she thought he did for her, and watching them sort of work through that and come back together after so many years had passed was a beautiful thing. Watching the hero's relationship with her daughter was beautiful. This book was funny, it was clever, it was romantic, it really had a big focus on the character's individual growth as well, so I feel like this is romance. You do get a happily ever after, but it also really focuses on the character's individual journeys. So it sort of is one of those books that I feel like bridges between women's fiction and romance. I felt like it was so beautiful and very compelling. I really enjoyed it. It was a highlight of the year for me. So, all right, there you have it. There are my top contemporary romances from 2021. Hope y'all enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave a recommendation if you have a favorite contemporary romance from last year you'd like to recommend, and I would love to check it out. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see y'all in my next video.